This episode is brought to you by GetYourGuide, home of unforgettable travel experiences, including a behind-the-scenes tour of the McLaren Technology Centre. Go to getyourguide.com to book now. In Formula One, first impressions can be career-defining. When Liam Lawson replaced Daniel Ricciardo for 5 races, he proved that he has what it takes to compete at the highest level, even if his ultimate goal remains out of reach for now.
A small part of me is going to feel a bit disappointed just to not be a full-time driver. Obviously, that's what my goal is. So obviously, I'll continue to work towards trying to achieve that. But I don't think there's a way that I end the year feeling fully fulfilled with how it's gone, to be honest.
While Lawson is frustrated not to be on the grid in 2024, he's now even more determined to realise his dream and to inspire a country.
When I go to the go-kart track in New Zealand and I speak to these 8-year-old kids, I say to them, what do you want to race when you're older? And they're like, oh, I'd like to be a Formula One driver, but it's impossible, so I'm going to try and do this. And it's like, you're 8 years old. You can't tell an 8-year-old what they can and can't be. And as an 8-year-old, you can believe whatever you want. I certainly did when I was that age. So I think that's also what I'm trying to do at the same time, is to show that basically it is possible from New Zealand. It might be very hard, but it's definitely possible.
Hello and welcome to F1 Beyond the Grid with me, Tom Clarkson. Liam Lawson has demonstrated over the last couple of months why Red Bull believe he's a potential star of the future. After Daniel Ricciardo broke his left hand at Zandvoort, Lawson seized his opportunity with both hands. He beat his AlphaTauri teammate Yuki Tsunoda in 4 of their 5 races together. He took his first F1 points in Singapore and he overcame tough conditions in Qatar. Liam truly experienced all the extremes that this sport has to offer, and he emerged unscathed and with a huge amount of credit to his name. Given how much experience he's built up in his junior career, perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised at how well he performed. He's been car racing since he was 12, and he's proved his quality by claiming a couple of titles along the way. In this chat, Liam candidly reflects on his Formula One debut. He tells me how he found out he'd be replacing Ricciardo, the biggest thing he's learned, and which other drivers he's leaned on for advice. We talk about his Red Bull origins and how he's dealt with being overlooked by the team for an F1 seat on several occasions. Liam also reveals who his racing heroes are, why he wants to show young New Zealanders that Formula One is a reachable goal, and what his hopes are for 2024. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Liam, great to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm good, very good. Nice to be here.
Now, this feels like the calm after the storm. You're back as a reserve driver for Red Bull after 5 races with AlphaTauri. Just how frustrated are you not to be racing?
Obviously, I always want to be driving. And I think the thing is, before F1, it had been my whole life, working towards it. And I always expected what it would be like, but you never really know what it's like in F1 until you actually drive. So you're always sort of anticipating. And now that I've actually had the chance to be in it, it's definitely a different feeling stepping back. Now I know what it's like. I don't have to, imagine anymore. To actually experience it has obviously been amazing and amazing for my career, but it's a little bit tough to step back.
Did Formula One live up to your expectations, those dreams that you'd had?
Absolutely. Honestly, yeah. Everything about it was very special, but at the same time, it was such a busy time. And also because I knew it was such a short period I was having, I knew I didn't have a season, like most drivers come in, you have a season to prove yourself. I knew that I had a short window that could, potentially, there was a point where maybe it would only be 2 races, maybe 3 races. And then obviously in the end it was 5, but I knew I had to make the most of it. And I think the whole time I was in it, I'd never really stepped back to think about what was really happening. It was all just focused on trying to maximize it.
Can we go back to Zandvoort? Race 1, of course, Daniel Ricciardo does the Friday practice and then has his accident in which he hurts his hand. What happened next? When did you find out that you were going to be racing that weekend?
There was probably like 2 hours of talks about it. It was very, very likely it was possible because obviously after the incident, we knew the situation with Daniel's hand, but we weren't 100% sure on what the exact injury would be or anything like that. I was notified very early about the potential of driving, but it wasn't locked in until the driver's briefing. I was in the driver's briefing when I found out. So basically, I was in the garage with Red Bull Racing watching the session like normal. And I saw the crash and I didn't think anything of it because it was quite a small crash. And then about 5 minutes later, they showed a radio from Daniel and it was him mentioning his hand. And there was like half a second, like a flash of opportunity, possibility that went through me that I thought, just maybe. And about 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed and it's from AlphaTauri and it's basically a message from the team saying, you need to be at the hospitality immediately after the session. And so then I knew what it was about. I knew obviously what was going on. So that last 20 minutes of the session, I was just pacing around the back of the garage. Honestly, the Red Bull engineers will know, they were all looking at me like, what is this guy doing? It was the longest 20 minutes, thinking what was potentially about to unfold. And I knew straight away, like of all the places, Zandvoort, one practice session, the weather's not good. Like all these things are rushing through my head. And I tried to put it aside and just be like, let's just find out what's going to happen. And that took like 2 hours. Yeah, it wasn't until driver's briefing.
How big an ask was that weekend in hindsight? As you say, Zandvoort, old school circuit, the weather was horrible. You only had the one practice session. It was huge, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really tricky. And it was just a lot. Like when I found out I was driving, there was probably an hour of just massive anxiety and nerves knowing what I was about to have to do. Once I sat down with the engineers and started going through the operational stuff from the car and everything like that and the run plans and what we were going to do, there was so much work to go through that, to be honest, from Friday night until when I got in the car on Saturday, I was just focused on basically what to do. And before I knew it, I was in the car and driving out. Did
you get any sleep, or were you just memorizing the steering wheel on Friday night, chatting to the engineers all night?
Yeah, not much sleep. Really bad sleep as well. I woke up loads. Friday night was rough. Saturday night was a lot better. I think after qualifying, I slept pretty good. I think we did like 7 pit stops in the race. There was just so much going on. Yeah, it was a tricky one.
Did you know at this point that you were definitely going to get Monza as well?
No. And that's the hardest part about it, is because for most of them, I didn't really know how many I was going to get. And so, especially for Zandvoort, because of the way the weekend was so tough, I knew I didn't really have my chance to show something. And obviously it's a little bit stressful thinking, if this is my only shot at F1, this sucks basically to have a go and to show something in F1. It wasn't the place to do it. And obviously the race was pretty rough. We ended okay.
You finished ahead of Yuki.
Yeah, the end of the race was okay. And when it rained again at the end, we were on intermediates, and it was probably by like 80% race distance, I started to actually feel real comfortable with the car and be able to be, because up until that, the whole weekend, I really struggled getting comfortable with it. I think the car is so fast, it takes so much commitment that if you basically have any hesitation about what you're doing, about what inputs you're putting in with steering, with throttle, with brake, anything like that, if you're not 100% confident to throw the car in, you lose so much lap time. You lose so much confidence with what's happening, and that's, I think, the difference between you look at a driver like Max. He's just so comfortable all the time. He's been in this car for so much time that now he's always really been like this, but so comfortable that, yeah, he knows exactly what's going to happen when he does something with the car. And I think that's where you start extracting those last little bits in Formula One.
Well, let's fast forward to Monza just a week later. How much easier was it to get 3 practice sessions and to extract the maximum from both you and the car?
It was much better, just as you say, because of the 3 practice sessions. So the way we set out our run plans, it was very much based around track time, doing many laps. And after P1, I was a few tenths off, but I knew that I had P2 to close the gap again. And then after P2, still a couple of tenths off, and knowing that we had that time to get there. And I think that made the biggest difference. By qualifying, I actually felt comfortable. I knew exactly where we were with the car, what we're changing. Yeah, a much better feeling than Zandvoort.
And the fact that Monza is a bit of a one-off in terms of downforce levels and things, did that play to your advantage in that Yuki, for example, hadn't driven the car in that spec?
I think it definitely helps. It's more of a weekend where for everybody it's a bit different, and because I'd never really driven, it doesn't really matter whether we're high or low downforce for me. I'm learning the car basically from scratch. So I think in that sense, yes, it was potentially better, and I think it helped for the weekend, but I think it was just having all that practice time really made the biggest difference.
Did you get any advice from the other Red Bull drivers, from Max, from Daniel even?
Daniel was very helpful in Zandvoort. Before he went away for his surgery, he was still at the track on Friday night, and I spoke to him. It was, obviously very, very nice about it, and also Max, I would say, especially in Monza. Max basically said to try and enjoy it, not to overthink it, just basically be as relaxed as you can be. To be fair, he's always been really good to me.
What happens if you overthink while driving a Formula One car? Do you then try too hard and you end up getting a bit ragged? Is that what happened?
I think to be fast, you're basically perfectly on the limit everywhere. On braking, on turning, on corner speeds, on exits. You're on the absolute limit of grip. And when you put too much pressure on yourself or you overthink things or try too hard, you just overstep that limit and it becomes very difficult. You also, operationally with Formula One, you're changing so many things that if you're putting too much pressure on yourself, if you're very results focused and basically trying to think about exactly where you need to be, then you're putting more pressure on yourself and you're struggling to make all the switch changes that you need to make. And yeah, it's just something that if you're relaxed, feeling comfortable, it's a lot easier.
Talk to us about the start in Monza, because I remember after the race you were frustrated about your getaway there. What happened?
Basically, the opposite procedure to I have in Japan for Super Formula to start a Formula One car. So all the practice starts we do, obviously I'm a lot more relaxed and it's a lot easier, and I can do the start procedure fine. But on the grids, it was my first maybe proper start in F1. I wasn't. I mean, at Zandvoort, I was off the back of the grid, so it didn't really matter. But in Monza, I'm in a decent position and it's quite high pressure. And unless I think about the full procedure, I naturally just, resort to my old procedure basically in Japan.
Annoying, frustrating, all of those things.
Was very frustrating. Because in the end we finished, a few seconds away from points.
We'll be back with more from Liam in just a moment. But first, did you know that finding and recruiting great talent for your business doesn't have to become a stressful second job? You can hire faster and better with Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So forget spending hours sharing posts on multiple job sites and searching for candidates with the right skills. Indeed can help you do it all. And that's what I like the most about Indeed's hiring platform. How efficiently it streamlines and automates the process. Its instant match technology shows you candidates whose resumes listed on Indeed fit your description immediately after you post so you can hire faster. Plus, it's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. According to Indeed data, in the US, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. And candidates you invite to apply for your role are 3 times more likely to submit an application than candidates who only see it in a job search. Indeed is an unbelievably powerful hiring platform, delivering 4 times more hires than all the other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. So don't get left behind. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/thegrid. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/thegrid. Just go to Indeed.com/thegrid and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/thegrid. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Well, let's bring it on to Singapore. This was the race when you really laid your claim on a full-time seat in Formula One. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
You qualified ahead of Yuki, and then you finished 9th. Can you even now, a few weeks on, remember the euphoria you felt as you crossed the line?
It was very special. It's a tricky question because at the same time, all of this, this stint that I had in Formula One and what I'm trying to achieve is ultimately it's a full-time seat. That's what I'm trying to work towards. So yes, it was a really good feeling knowing that potentially I'd made a big step in trying to achieve that. But I also knew before Singapore that I wasn't driving next year. I knew that basically I wasn't going to get the seats, and I found out before qualifying. So before the weekend really started,
timing is everything.
Timing wasn't great. So, and it was tough because the media, nobody knew that, and the media didn't know. So after qualifying, we had a good qualifying, and the media's really positive and basically saying all these great things about what chances I have of driving next year, but I knew I wasn't. And I think it was a similar feeling after the race. I knew that I wasn't going to be in next year. So it definitely took away from what it would have felt like.
How did that bad news affect your motivation?
I mean, it definitely didn't. The thing is, motivation's never been an issue, and I think for most drivers in Formula One, if you're at the top of your game, you have all the motivation in the world. So for me, it wasn't like it added to it. I've always been extremely motivated, so it was frustration, but yeah, it's a tricky one. The hardest thing was dealing with all the positivity afterwards and all the talk about what
knowing
was
the reality.
Knowing that I wasn't. Yeah, I knew exactly what was going to happen, but I couldn't tell anybody.
Did you know at that point, and I'm talking after the race in Singapore, that you were going to get Japan and Qatar as well?
I knew Japan, basically. I knew we were going to do Japan, but I didn't know about Qatar. So I knew that we were going to have Japan, which was really cool because I'd driven there this year. And so I think that was exciting to do.
So what did the management say to you after the race in Singapore? Before qualifying, they told you that you're not racing in 2024. Did they give you any words of encouragement after that points finish?
Yeah. It's all positive and it was all nice things and basically, you know, it obviously helps your future and helps your chance of driving in the future. But for me, you know, it's all about getting a seat. So it doesn't really make too much of a difference to me unless I have a signed contract.
So you must have been supremely confident going to Japan. You've just had that points finish. You knew the track from Super Formula. You tested there. You raced there earlier this year. How were you feeling?
Definitely not supremely confident, but I was feeling good and knowing the track, obviously, I think it was a big bonus for me. I think at the same time, you know, Yuki's kind of grew up on that track, or he grew up there. So I knew that he was going to be extremely fast, but I was excited for that track. I think more excited just because Formula One on Suzuka, it's like the perfect combination of car and track. And I think because I knew the track as well from Super Formula, I would say a bit more confident. But the thing is, going into any of these weekends, I definitely wasn't confident into any of them. I knew it was going to be always very, very tough. And we didn't start from square one each weekend, but it was definitely a bit of a reset going to each track. And it was always a build-up. And I think that's why Qatar was pretty tricky as well, just because of the sprint layout of the weekends. All the others, you know, Japan included, I basically had all that practice time to build up.
How difficult is it to find the limit in Sector 1 at Suzuka in a Formula 1 car?
Difficult, but to be honest, it definitely wasn't an issue for us. We were there pretty much straight away in Sector 1. To be honest, I think a lot of it comes from the stuff I've done in Japan this year in Super Formula. The car is very strong and high speeds. You know, the biggest thing about stepping into Formula 1 is getting used to a car with that much downforce. And I think you don't quite get that from Formula 2. And I think that's a really big step. But with Super Formula, I think that made a big difference because, to be honest, your heart rate's very high, but at least the speed was there pretty much straight away.
I thought the racing between you and Yuki at the start of the Japanese Grand Prix was sensational. It was hard, but fair.
It was very close. But yeah, I mean, I agree.
Do you enjoy it?
I think so. The thing is, I raced Yuki from quite young. I raced him when I was 17 years old. I think we started racing each other 16, 17. So it's different when you're racing somebody that you know.
There's more trust.
There's more trust. The thing with Formula One, because it's the elite, you know, class. Some drivers are more aggressive than others, but you at least know there's always a higher level of trust than other categories, let's say. So, but obviously when it's somebody you know more about how they race. And I think that helped at the start of the race, but it was very close for sure. It was literally all the way up until the safety car. We were still side by side.
Did you touch?
No, I don't think we did. No, nowhere, to be honest. It was very close, but it was on the limit.
But what about the old guard? When I say the old guard, I just mean, you know, the establishment, the established drivers. How have they been with you in these 5 races?
Everybody, to be fair, has been very, I mean, outside of the car, been very welcoming and nice, which has been really cool. And I think something that I maybe didn't expect so much. I mean, I haven't raced, obviously, everybody, but there's definitely a difference with guys like Fernando. His car placement is just very, very clever. He's very experienced, and it comes out every time you're racing him. We had like a free practice session in Monza where it was at the end of the session, we were wheel to wheel, and guys like that who are that experienced always seems to put their car in the right place.
Did he talk to you afterwards?
A little bit. I think I've spoken to most of the drivers. Obviously guys like Fernando, Lewis, guys that I grew up watching when I was a kid. So it's quite cool to be able to speak with them. But at the end of the day, now I just want to be racing these guys.
Now, you said after Singapore that it had been one of the hardest races of your career. We then go to Qatar 2 races later. Little did you know, Liam Lawson. Look, how much tougher was Qatar and how long did it take you to get over it?
It was definitely tougher than Singapore, but it wasn't that much tougher. I honestly, Singapore, the last like 20 laps of Singapore were really, really tough because my tires were quite old and I knew I had Red Bulls coming at me and I knew they were catching me like 2 seconds a lap. And then I had Alex on fresh tires as well coming. Basically, it's quite a tricky situation when you know in about 5 laps time, you're going to be in a scrap with somebody and it's trying to work out exactly how you're going to make this work and how you're going to keep the cars behind and try and make the most out of it. So Singapore was a bit unique just because it was an absolute battle for the last 10 laps. I was constantly wheel to wheel with another car and mentally on a street circuit, it's so draining trying to be perfect all the time. Whereas Qatar was so physical. I was just ultimately, basically, even for me, I was pretty much on my own the whole race, but it was just such a physical race and nobody said it was going to be like that. I think we knew it was going to be like that. We go to Singapore early because we know it's a tough race. We acclimatize, we train there. Qatar was just a normal sort of preparation for the weekend. And it was just an absolute shock to the body that like 25 laps in, it was seriously tough.
Did you drink from a water bottle or?
I did a lot of hydrating before the weekends, but I've always, because I haven't driven that much in Formula One, I'd never used drinks tube before. The first time I tried to use it was Zandvoort, and I had an absolute nightmare.
What, sprayed all over your face?
Basically, when I went to use the tube, I tried to grab it with my mouth, and I flicked it up, and it got stuck in my nose. So we're like 5 laps in to the race, I think.
Your first Grand Prix. I'd just like to remind the listeners.
There's so much going on, right? I'm like learning this car on slick tires. I'd never driven all weekend on slicks. It was the start of a Grand Prix, so there's obviously a lot going on. And I thought, I wasn't even thirsty. I didn't even know why I did it because it was 5 laps in. So I'm like, I'm just going to give the drink tube a go. And obviously it gets stuck in my nose and I can't get it out. So 3 laps go by, 4 laps go by, and I'm stressing now because I'm thinking, am I going to have to do the whole race with this drink tube stuck in my nose? Thankfully, a safety car came out. Quite early on, we had a safety car and I could reach up and basically grab it. And I didn't touch it for the rest of the race. But that was my first experience with it. So I've always struggled using it in the race. I don't know why, but so for Qatar, I only used it in the pit lane. Obviously, luckily, we had a couple of stops. We had to do 3 stops, but I definitely didn't drink as much as I needed. And also, it 5 laps in, it's hot. It's basically like drinking tea.
What is the biggest thing you've learned during these 5 races?
To pick one thing, to narrow it down to one thing is tricky. There's been so much in Formula One. You have a lot more time, so it's a lot more time goes into trying to make the most out of the car and yourself. Basically, by the time you get to qualifying, I'm used to in recent years in F2 and even in Super Formula, a lot less track time means that in qualifying, you're still kind of learning a little bit here and there. But in F1, by the time you get to qualifying, everybody is in a position where they just know exactly what to do on each tire set, where to find the time, how to put the car on the limit. And it's so close that took a little bit of time to get used to. Yeah, this is a lot of things.
Are you a better racing driver now than you were 6 weeks ago?
I mean, I've learned so much being in F1 that I would say yes, I'm better than I was.
And you've achieved so much as well. It's been an incredible run for you. I mean, when are you going to race a Formula One car again? When are you even going to drive a Formula One car again? Because you're no longer qualified to do any of the young drivers.
I can't do any of the free practice sessions anymore. I don't know. Truthfully, I don't know. I don't know if I'll get to drive again, and if it is, I don't know when it will be.
I mean, what does 24 hold for you?
Right now, I'm because I've raced in most championships out. I mean, now I've even been in F1. I can't really go and do F2 again. There'd be no point. I can't do Super Formula again. I could, but there's less benefit from doing it. So I think it's full focus on being reserve. That means a lot of simulator, which for me, I think what helped getting into Formula One and adjusting to it so quickly has been, I've been 2 years now nearly as reserve. So I've done lots of simulator work over the last couple of years, and that will just continue now into next year. And getting to learn and basically absorb being alongside the best team in Formula One right now. I get to sit through all the meetings and learn how they operate.
You've proved that you deserve a place on the Formula One grid. I think everyone listening to this would agree with that. So how frustrating is it that you've effectively been pushed down by Red Bull 3 times. First, Nick de Vries gets the AlphaTauri drive at the start of 2023 instead of you. Then Daniel replaces Nick in Hungary instead of you. Daniel then gets the seat next year alongside Yuki, or Yuki alongside Daniel, depends how you look at it, when perhaps you'd argue that you've done enough to prove you need a race seat. Just how are you feeling about all that? Do you understand Red Bull's position?
I think that's what's potentially helped through each scenario is, yes, it's extremely frustrating, but I've been able to sit there and go, I can understand at the time of this decision why this makes sense. And that goes back to de Vries last year. At that point, we were having a shocking F2 season, and we turned around at the end, but it was all too late. I had a really good end to the season. I had good testing in F1, but by then the decision's made. So that's frustrating. But at the time that the decision was made, I think I could sit there and understand why, just because of how my season was. And I think then this year as well, although I'm having a much better season, you have the option, mid-season in a team that's struggling quite a bit to, at least with the car, you have an option of somebody who's never been in Formula One to jump in mid-season, or somebody who's very experienced in Formula One and has won races. And so again, it's frustrating to take, but I can sit there and go, okay, I can make sense of this decision and understand it. I would say it's frustrating to not be driving next year, but I will continue to make the most of still being in Formula One involved at least. Yeah, I think I'm a Red Bull driver. If I ever get a chance in Formula One, it'll be through Red Bull Racing and most likely at some point. I don't know, honestly, but I think it would be with Red Bull that they give me my shot. So,
Liam, let's wind the clock back. Tell us when you first came on the Red Bull radar. I mean, I read a story that it was one particular race in the Toyota Racing Series back home in New Zealand. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it was even just an overtake. Like literally one overtake, I think is
Helmut
what
loves a good overtake.
It was to be fair, it was a really big overtake.
Talk us through it. What happened?
It was basically in New Zealand, the Toyota Racing Series is like our Formula One. And for me, when I was a kid, I always used to watch the series and I always wanted to race in it. And all the Kiwi guys that had done it, they were like heroes. So I watched Mitch Evans and Nick Cassidy and those guys race in the series. And the year before I raced, I was just on the cusp of being old enough, but I wasn't old enough. And so they wouldn't let me race. But there was guys, we had a Red Bull Junior, Richard Vishaw was there as a Red Bull driver. And I remember like idolizing this guy when he was doing that series. So it'd been something that I'd really wanted to do for a long time. And I finally got to race in it. And I'd done German F4 in 2018. That was my season in Europe. We found as much money as we could, and we managed to get enough through sponsorship and investment to race in F4. But we had no plan for 2019. I had basically nothing signed, and no money as well, really. I couldn't step into F3. We had no idea what I was going to do, but I went and did the Toyota Racing Series, and it was the first race weekend, and it was like a damp race, and it was drying up. And
where was it?
Highlands. So it was Highlands, which is South Islands, first rounds, and basically I did this big pass on the outside. It might have been for the leads on the last corner. It's basically a very close move, lots of wheel touching, and the following day I think we had a contract from Red Bull, or like an offer, from.
It happened that quickly.
It was really quickly. It was the following day. I'm pretty sure we had something basically ready.
I mean, talk us through it. What, Helmut Marko picks up the telephone? How does a deal happen that fast?
The way it all happened was a bit strange. The conversation was Helmut directly calling my manager in New Zealand, and our response was we need to have a little bit of time, I think. So they kept it to themselves and didn't tell me. But through other sources, I ended up finding out, and I found out maybe the following week, just before our next round, and I was sitting with a coach for one of the other drivers, but he basically knew this about this contract. I can remember all of it so clearly. I'm sitting in a cafe in Queenstown in New Zealand, and he basically tells me, I mean, Red Bull is especially the junior team. That was my absolute dream. I used to look at, like I said, Richard Vishaw, Jack Doohan. I raced in F4 when he was a Red Bull driver, and I just thought it was the coolest team to be a part of. I remember basically just being really surprised. I couldn't even walk properly. I remember having to really think about walking. It was super, super strange.
Because you were so giddy.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I just knew how important this was. It goes a long way back, but basically the support from New Zealand, the support to get me to race overseas, came through a lot of really amazing people, a lot of support through sponsorship and investment, because my parents haven't paid for my racing since I was in go-karts. The whole idea when we set up the structure to go race in Europe was the only way we make this work is if we get picked up by a junior team. We have to get picked up by one of the Formula One teams if we're going to get anywhere, because otherwise there's no way we have the money to do it. And I'd done that first year in F4. I'd finished second, but there was nothing that came out of it. I had no idea what I was going to race in 2019. And then I have this pop up. And I knew Red Bull was a team that if I delivered, I would get the chance to race in Formula One.
What about racing on the other side of the world? How tough did you find it moving to Europe, being 10,000 miles away from your family? Did you get homesick?
I did, but it wasn't actually. I was just so excited to be honest, to race overseas, to race in Europe. My first year I lived, before I was a Red Bull driver, I did that one season of German F4. I lived in the Netherlands for a year. So that was my first year away from New Zealand. I lived in the Netherlands. And I raced for Van Amersfoort with the Dutch team. So I lived there, and I remember I had a terrible sleep schedule. I was pretty hopeless at looking after myself, but I quite enjoyed it, to be honest, just being away from home and racing in Europe. But I think it definitely, if anything, it gets harder.
What bit gets harder? The homesickness, or?
I would say a bit of everything. Homesickness has not been too much of an issue, but as you get higher up, you start dealing with more pressure, there's a lot more responsibility, and then you're doing more races, you're traveling more. In that sense, that stuff gets a bit harder the longer you go. When you're younger, there's not so much expectation, not so much pressure around you. You're young, and I think as you get older, you take on a lot more responsibility.
I mean, a direct comparison we could make is Oscar Piastri, who's done a similar thing to you. He's left Melbourne, Australia, come to Europe, but he's had Mark Webber batting for him over in Europe. Who have you had? Who's been your big brother, if you like, whilst in Europe?
So I have had a driver coach for the last 5 years. And when I say driver coach, it's not so much, Liam, you need to brake here and turn here, and not that kind of driver coach. It's been a mental coach, performance coach, let's say. And his name's Enzo Mucci. And he's basically been somebody that's been with me since I first came to Europe. And he's somebody that used to work with Gravity, and he worked with Gravity drivers, and he worked with Richie Stanaway, who's obviously a New Zealand driver. And Richie was my favorite when I was younger. I had that introduction to Enzo through the same guys who supported Richie. A lot of them are supporting me. But when I was very young, I was like 12 years old, and I just stepped out of go-karts to cars, and I was going for the scholarship basically to drive a car, because even after go-karts we didn't have any money to race cars.
And that's
in
Formula
New Zealand.
First, isn't
Formula
it?
First was the scholarship I was going for, and it was like a 6-hour drive to where we were going, and I'm like 12 years old, and my dad had these CDs, and it was just this guy talking basically, and he put these CDs on and we listened to them for hours, and it was this guy talking about all these different things, how to get sponsorship, how to basically speak to people and convince people to support you, how to mentally deal with the pressure of being a racing driver, all these different things. And it turns out it was Enzo. It was actually Enzo who I was listening to when I was like 12 years old. And then I started working with him when I came to Europe. So he's been somebody that's been a massive part of, especially when I joined Red Bull, dealing with the pressure of being a Red Bull driver. He was a massive part of dealing with that. And my first year with Red Bull was really tough.
This episode is brought to you by GetYourGuide, a leading online travel experience platform and home of Originals by GetYourGuide, an exclusive collection of unforgettable travel experiences. GetYourGuide offers all sorts of one-of-a-kind trips, but the one I think you'll be most interested in is a behind-the-scenes tour of the McLaren Technology Centre, the home of the McLaren Formula One team, where the cars driven by Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are designed and built. It's an absolutely incredible place, and GetYourGuide is exclusively offering the first general public tour. You'll get an up-close look at the legendary McLarens that took Senna, Prost, Lauda, Hamilton, Ricciardo, and many more to victory. Plus there's the trophy cabinet, filled with hundreds of pieces of silverware won by McLaren's race winners and world champions. It's an amazing thing to see. And GetYourGuide will give you a glimpse of Mission Control, one of the most secretive rooms in motorsport, where McLaren engineers sit during each Grand Prix to support the drivers and team at the racetrack. You should check out the Originals by GetYourGuide collection. It's a mix of exclusive, one-of-a-kind experiences, and if you're a sports fan, you'll find so many exciting things to do in the UK, the US, and around the world. Remember that the tour of the McLaren Technology Centre is only available to the public with Originals by GetYourGuide. Reservations are on a first-come, first-served basis on selected dates throughout the year. Visit GetYourGuide.com to book the Originals by GetYourGuide McLaren experience now. So Liam, I'm fascinated that you were racing cars at the age of 12.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, New Zealand, you can start young, apparently. So it's been a huge benefit because by the time I came to Europe and I'm racing guys in F4, it's their first, they're set from go-karts to F4. It's their first season of car racing. I'd done Formula First in New Zealand. Then I did Formula Ford in New Zealand at 14. Then I did Formula 4 in Australia immediately afterwards at like 14, 15 years old. And then I'd done like 3 seasons of racing.
Yeah, I mean, you're a high mileage 21-year-old.
If I look at all the seasons of racing that I've done since I was basically started out, I mean, I can list them off. It would be a lot. It's Formula First, Formula Ford, it's Formula 4 Australia, Formula 4 Germany, then it's Toyota Racing Series, then it's Formula 3 Open, FIA Formula 3 in the same season, then it's Toyota Racing Series again, then it's Formula 3 FIA again, then it's FIA F2 and DTM, then it's another season of FIA F2, then it's Super Formula this year. I mean, I didn't count, but that's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of racing.
It is extraordinary. Yeah. And I guess driving so many different cars helps again when you get that call at Zandvoort to go and race another new car because you're used to jumping from beast to beast.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many skills you learn in different ways in motorsport. It's not just driving a car fast. It's for me, obviously, having all that experience in different cars. It's a lot of adapting. And in a random season like 2021, where I'm doing F2 and DTM, the two most opposite cars you can drive, learning to basically drive between the two of them and maximize that.
How difficult was it to jump from car to car?
The start of the year, I was on the verge of calling Helmut and telling him this is not going to work. I'm going to fail. I'd done a couple of DTM tests, and then I went and did an F2 test in Barcelona. And my first lap, I was 3 seconds off, and it felt like a good lap, and I was really concerned. So it was tough, but I learned, throughout the season how to make it work. And by halfway through the season, I actually felt quite good dealing with both different cars. So I think, as you say, over the years, just all the different things I've been able to do, and one way or another, they've helped.
Alex Albon was your teammate in DTM in 21. What was that like? What did you learn off him?
It was really cool. He probably got sick of it, but I would have asked him so many questions about Formula One, being with Red Bull and what it was like. But he was always really, really nice about it, and a lot was learnt just from driving. But I would say more that I got from talking to Alex was all the stuff outside of the car, the stuff like dealing with pressure in Formula One and dealing with everything that comes with it. He lost his license that year. Like, he physically lost it. Didn't do anything stupid. He lost it. So he couldn't drive a rental car. So we used to drive together for like a couple of the races, and there'd be like 2-3 hour drives from the airport. And so I'd sit and talk to him and basically just talk about being in Formula One. And it was just lots of talking about being with Red Bull, what it was like, dealing with the pressure of being a Formula One driver, what it was like being teammates with Max, how he drove, stuff like that, I think was what I really learned from Alex.
Now, next weekend, you have the Super Formula finale. You can win the championship. Irrespective of what happens next weekend in terms of the championship, bigger picture now, how will you look back on 2023?
I think it depends on how we go in Super Formula. If we have a really good finish to the season, I'd be able to look back on the year and be like, what an amazing year. But there's always going to be, I think, no matter how it goes and how this year finishes, I'm always going to have a small part of me is going to feel a bit disappointed just to not be a full-time driver. Obviously, that's what my goal is. So obviously, I'll continue to work towards trying to achieve that. But I don't think there's a way that I end the year feeling fully fulfilled with how it's gone, to be honest.
Can I at least get you to reflect on what I think must have been a highlight? I want to take you back to February when you drove the RB7 at Bathurst.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that must have been a highlight, right?
I've never had a rush from driving. Like, I've never had a rush in anything, actually, like I had driving that car around that track. It was completely crazy. I mean, Bathurst, it was my first time driving the track as well. So I had never been there. So I'd done it, on the simulator a lot over the years, and V8 Supercars is like a big thing in New Zealand, a big championship that we follow. And I followed it as much as Formula One when I was a kid. So it's this iconic track, and then I get to drive this iconic car, this car that I watched Red Bull and Sebastian dominate for 4 years in the era of Formula One. So it was very, very special. But honestly, it was just, I had so much adrenaline. I remember after the run, I immediately went to the airport to fly home. So I get out of the car, I do a couple of interviews, and I get in the taxi, and I'm just talking to my taxi driver, just like chewing his ear off, man, like talking to him so much.
I've got to share this experience with someone.
Yeah, I just couldn't stop it because I was on such a high. And then I just crashed like massively right before I took off and flew back.
How hard did you push?
To be honest, at different points of the track, I did push. I wasn't allowed to do the whole lap pushing. We weren't allowed to set records. So,
what?
Yeah, no, we couldn't do that. So, I really wanted to go there and have a crack at the record. So that's why I would push for half a lap, and then I would do a couple of donuts, and then I'd push again. And it was very, very cool.
I remember Jenson Button saying something similar after he drove the track in the McLaren. Just elated, excited.
It's so dangerous.
Yeah. Best track you've ever driven? Or
obviously it's up there, but I would love to drive a supercar around that track and on the limit, because I haven't done a whole lap, on the limit. It's very cool to drive. I actually before I drove the Formula One car, I did like 2 laps just in an E63 medical car. I had Adrian Burgess from Supercars. I had some Red Bull guys with me, and I remember driving out, and we were all like talking about, how it was going to be. This is where you're going to do a donut here, and this is how it's going to work, and this is like a section of the track where there's a camera here, and there was a lot of talking. And then on the second lap, I thought I'd, get into it a bit more, and the whole car was silent. The whole lap, nobody said a word. It was just completely silent, and I was, pushing this road car. And it's just an amazing place to drive with the way the track, with the elevation and things like that. You experience things that you would never experience on other circuits. Some corners, because of the way the track drops away, you actually turn in way before you would normally turn in, but you just got to account for the car going over that crest and sliding across the top of the track, and then you pick up that line, and it's just like such a cool place to drive. I would love to do it in a car that I can push.
Let's talk about your racing heroes, if we could. I mean, the obvious person to talk about is Bruce McLaren. He set up, great racing driver himself, set up a phenomenal racing team. Is he a hero, or is it much more current? Tell me who you looked up to at home.
I mean, that definitely heroes of mine, and they're definitely guys that I would say, like, the history going that far back is very, very cool for New Zealand, and something that I massively appreciate. But in terms of actual heroes and guys that I looked up to growing up, it was definitely current guys. Like, Richie was my favorite. Richie, just the way he drove, he was a guy that I basically looked up to the most. He came very close to F1 as well, as quite a lot of guys did. Mitch as well. I think Nick Cassidy is also 100% good enough for Formula One. And
Nick was your teammate in the final round of the DTM Championship, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. So Nick's somebody that I put definitely right up at the top there.
What about the sort of Scott Dixons and the guys doing things in America now?
Definitely, and Scott as well. I read Scott's book when I was a lot younger, and Lewis as well. Lewis was like my ultimate hero from when I was really, really young. I read his book as well when I say I read books. I don't read it all now. I didn't really read back then. The only books I would read was
biographies.
Was like drivers basically. Yeah. So I read Lewis's book as well when I was a kid.
How inspiring was Lewis Hamilton for you?
Yeah, very, very inspiring. I think also Red Bull was a team that I loved and wanted to. They were my favorite team as a kid because of the way the car looked. Firstly, just the car looked really, really cool. And when you're a kid, that attracts you. But just the way they were so dominant and the way they worked over those years. But you always root for the underdog in a way. And Lewis with McLaren was somebody that was very inspiring to me. Yeah, I would say he was my favorite when I was a kid.
I mean, it goes back. You got obviously Bruce McLaren, Denny Hulme, Chris Amon, Mike Thackwell. Now there's a name for the listeners. He was a phenomenal driver who I think did one season of Formula One and then gave up.
And he was our last, before Brendan, I think he was the last F1 driver from New Zealand to race. So we had that massive gap basically until Brendan.
What did Brendan Hartley do for you? How did he help pave your way?
It's a big part of why this is also very important to me is since I was a kid, we have this just expectation in New Zealand that it's impossible to go to Formula One. So when I was a kid, and I would tell, even these are drivers that I won't name them, but drivers I looked up to as a kid, when I would meet them, quite often they say, what do you want to do when you're older? And I would say, I want to be a Formula One driver. And the response would be, oh, that's impossible. You can't do that. And now when I go to like the go-kart track in New Zealand and I speak to these 8-year-old kids, I say to them, what do you want to race when you're older? And they're like, oh, I'd like to be a Formula One driver, but it's impossible. So I'm going to try and do this. And it's like, you're 8 years old. You can't tell an 8-year-old for a start what they can and can't be. And as an 8-year-old, you can believe whatever you want. I certainly did when I was that age. So I think Brendan helped show that it's possible still to be there. And that's also what I'm trying to do at the same time, is to show that basically it is possible from New Zealand. It might be very hard, but it's definitely possible.
Well, Liam, best of luck at Suzuka next weekend in that finale of the Super Formula Championship. Good luck there. And I am sure we're going to see you back on the Formula One grid soon.
I hope so. We'll see.
Thank you very much for your time. Of course you can't tell young kids what they can and can't become. Liam, you're an inspiration to many in New Zealand and around the world. Now, I love this chat. Liam's description of the 5 races he did with AlphaTauri is fascinating, it's educational, and it's amusing. I mean, that drinks bottle straw story from Zandvoort is priceless. Liam, many thanks for your time. It was great to chat. Good luck with what comes next, and I'll see you at a racetrack again soon. Now, please send in your thoughts and stories about Liam. What's your assessment of the races he did for AlphaTauri? What hopes do you have for him in the future? Let me know through all the usual means. I'm at Tom Clarkson F1 on X, and you can use the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid. All that segues beautifully into what you sent in after last week's episode with Andrea Stella. I referred to that conversation as a lesson in how to go motor racing, and it seems many of you agree. Let's start with this from Philip Pegler. An incredible talk with Andrea Stella, which really sets the bar at a new height. An incredible career and track record, and wonderful to listen to. He's a gentleman who continues to apply everything he's learned in his current position. McLaren is on the way back. Thanks for that, Philip. Thank you for getting in touch. Great message. Next, let's hear from Paul Underhay. Great episode, Tom. Andrea is impressive, particularly when explaining how he's focused on creating the conditions for continuous improvement rather than chasing individual upgrades. Plus the need to be happy being out of your comfort zone. Will he go back to Ferrari? Well, Paul, who knows what the future holds, but I find it very hard to believe he'll go back to Ferrari, not after what he's achieving at McLaren, but never say never in this game. Finally, let's hear from Matt Alford. Wow, I could listen to Andrea all day long. So much experience and so logical and sensible with his answers. Definitely a lesson in motor racing. Haha, we agree, Matt. And thanks for the note. And thank you too to everyone who wrote in. We love your messages and we do read them all, even if I don't have time to read them all out now. And please remember to send in your thoughts and stories about Liam Lawson in time for next week's show. Well, that's pretty much it for this week. Thank you for listening, and don't forget that F1 Nation's review of the United States Grand Prix is out now wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, I'll be back next week with another great guest from the world of Formula One. See you then. F1 Beyond the Grid is produced by Formula One and Audioboom Studios. Until next time, keep it flat out.